The Real Estate Wise Guys Podcast.
All right, my friends, welcome to the very first episode of the Real Estate Wise Guys. You excited for this?
Very excited.
Let's get after it. So in this podcast, we're going to be going over Austin's real estate market, and we will also be answering your real estate questions, as well as giving you a little behind the scenes look at our lives as realtors, brokers, and real estate investors. Today's episode, Sean and I are going to give you a little background of our history in real estate. That way you can learn a little bit about us and our qualifications as we go through this podcast. Then we're going to touch on Austin's current real estate market, and then we'll jump into one question from our audience and discuss that question for you. All right, without further ado, Sean, you ready to jump into telling us all about your history in real estate?
Yes, sir.
That's good.
My real estate journey started before I was in Austin. It was in 2007 or so. I got licensed, worked for a commercial developer doing basically administrative stuff. Made the move to Austin in 2010 and actually got licensed right when I moved here. Was actually in property management in the downtown area and transitioned to sales in 2015 and opened the brokerage 2019, and here we are.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your development and all that you've been working on?
Yeah, so in 2020 is when I got made the transition partially into real estate development. We took on our first project in the middle of the pandemic. We've got 2 projects going right now, and we've got a few in the pipeline, and that is kind of a separate arm of the business that obviously coincides with the brokerage business. They kind of go hand in hand, but that is a steady thing that we're trying to build on and do more of that.
Very good. Roughly how many transactions a year do you do?
This in 2021, which a little bit of somewhat of an outlier, but I would say the average of the last few years is between 30 and 35 transactions a year.
So you got a pretty good clue about how these real estate transactions work.
Yeah, I actually checked recently. I hit 100 transactions, 100 sales earlier this year. So it's in Austin. So we've been around a little bit.
For sure. Awesome.
And tell us about your journey. Where did you start, and how did you end up where you are now?
Well, as far as coming to Austin, I was working in North Dakota the 4 years previous to moving here, running a machine shop, and I needed to get out of there. So I Googled the best places to live in the U.S. with warm weather and pretty girls, and Austin was on top of the list. I moved here. I was in the process of getting my MBA, so I actually was moving here because of the solid job market and planning on getting into a management role. But I went golfing with a buddy in Colorado on the way down from North Dakota, who was a realtor, and he encouraged me to check out becoming a realtor, and I did so. Thought I was going to really kill it in the real estate game, and took my test, got it all done, got my license. 10 months later, I had cashed 0 checks and was really grinding hard but not making any progress. Was able to push through that, and then after that 10-month hiatus of no checks, I was able to get 5 contracts completed in that month and took off from there. Did $5 million in that first year in sales, and then over the last few years, I pretty much doubled that each year to where last year we did over $20 million in sales.
Very nice. And Zac and I met in 2016.
Yeah.
Was that 2016? We were both at JB Goodwin here in Austin, and that was Zac's first. That was your first stop, right?
Yes, sir.
That was my second stop, and we connected then. That was when he was working hard and making $0, which is the introduction that a lot of people have into real estate sales. Not very different than mine. I had 1 transaction in the first 12 months and made $17,000 my first year, which is
money in the bank.
Yeah, not a living wage. And yeah, we kind of overlapped a few years at JB Goodwin. I had left and started the brokerage, and then Zac joined me in early 2020.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and tell me a little bit about the Barger team. You came here as a one-man shop, and I got that team's grown a little bit.
Well, it definitely didn't come as a one-man shop. I had my director of business operations, the man behind the scenes, Carson Baskin, pulling all the strings and making it happen for me. But yeah, we came here together. Carson works behind the scenes, handling all of my transaction admin and helping me with all the marketing and everything. But we just took on a lot of transactions last year and saw an opportunity this year to bring on a couple buyer's agents. So we have my good friends Henry and Ryan, who are starting in their real estate careers. They just got licensed, and we're helping them get going, and helping them grow as buyer's agents, and eventually we'll get them into a position where they can start doing listings as well.
Very cool. And Zach has steadily increased his business volume the years that he's been here, and last year was a record-setting year for him and the Barter team. So congratulations on that.
Thanks, my man.
Do you have any investing personally here in Austin?
Yeah, so I own 2 rentals by myself, and then I have one with a partner. Those are just long-term rentals. Got a couple more under contract that should be closing here in the next few months. My first property that I purchased was here in 2018. Actually sold that and used those funds to purchase a couple more properties. So trying to add a few more cash flowing properties and keep building that empire.
Expand that portfolio.
Yes, sir.
Very cool.
All right. Well, I think that kind of wraps up a little bit about our real estate history, so you guys know we have at least a little bit of credibility. But let's go ahead and jump into Austin's market update, and I'll have Sean take the lead on this. But Austin's market has definitely shifted pretty dramatically over the last 90 days. Can you just kind of give us a feel for what you're seeing in the market and why that's occurred?
Yeah, we have certainly seen a shift. Anyone who's been paying a little bit of attention has known that Austin has been a ridiculously hot real estate market for the last several years, but especially kind of from the pandemic onward, it's been gangbusters. We've seen very, very low levels of inventory, really high price appreciation year over year, been very competitive, very difficult environment to be a buyer in, and I don't even want to say it's an easy market to be a seller in, but sellers were selling their homes at levels that they never could have expected and that we've ever seen. That all changed really. The tide started to turn a little bit in April as the first rate increase started to make its way into the mortgage rates. So as the Fed fund increased their rates, we started to feel the effect of it. Sometimes it's almost speculation. Buyers react to that before we actually feel it, so to speak. So we were seeing buyer retraction, listing inventory was increasing, and those two things kind of feed off of each other. So the biggest thing that we saw was buyer retraction was happening simultaneously as listing inventory was increasing, and that's something that happens naturally between January and June. We always see listing numbers go up. Normally the buyer demand increases with that, with the seasonality of the business, so they stay somewhat linear. That has not been the case this year. Buyers have all but disappeared. That's a little bit of hyperbole. It's retracted in a dramatic sense, and the listing inventory has increased, and so we have this surplus of inventory relative to what we've seen. And the factors that are playing into that, mortgage rates are significantly higher now than they were 12 months ago, even 8 months ago. The affordability in Austin in general, with prices increasing as much as they have been, it makes it harder to buy a house, it makes it harder to get into a property, and with increased interest rates, that problem is exponential. The talk of a recession and the inflation news that is basically on the TV every single time you turn it on is that creates fear in buyers and people in general. And for the most part, they may not act fearful, they just don't act and they don't make moves. They're not looking at houses, they're just kind of staying put, waiting to see what's going to happen. So all of those things kind of factored in these last 3 to 4 months has made our market much, much quieter than what we're used to. Not to say that this outcome is a surprise. I think my biggest surprise, I'd be interested to hear your take on it, is how quickly it happened. We've said it 100 times. We never expected Austin to do 20% appreciation year over year. We didn't expect the levels of inventory to stay where they're at for long term. It was unsustainable. No one really expected that. The return to where we're at now, I did not expect it to happen in 3 or 4 months' time, and it happened in 3 or 4 months' time, which is remarkable. And the biggest question right now is, how long is this going to last? When are we going to start to, shift back or get those buyers back into the marketplace? And yeah, that's the $1 million question that we're talking to buyers and talking to people in the market, trying to figure that out. And I think the big thing is, the further we get from those 2.75, 3% interest rate days, and we start to get a little bit more positive news on the national economic level, I think buyers will realize Austin's a pretty good place to buy real estate, and it's a good long-term investment. It's an economically strong city, and I think that's when we're going to start to see that. Personally, I think that's probably going to be inside of 12 months, probably closer to the end of the year, beginning of next year. But time will tell. We'll see what I think the biggest thing, the last piece that I'll add is inflation numbers. The inflation rate has to come down for, I think, the buyer confidence to come back into the housing market, and mainly because inflation is scary for a lot of people, because they don't know what it's going to do, how it's going to affect them, are they going to lose their job, all of that. As soon as that starts to get curbed, which is what the Fed's trying to do, I think the housing market would become a little bit more, we can know what to expect a little bit better.
For sure.
What are, with that being said, what are your thoughts on, are you seeing similar, different opinion?
Yeah, it's definitely been a lot slower than we were seeing last year. Can't believe how quickly it turned around when we talk about like 3 to 4 months that we went from basically half a month of inventory to now we're expecting July's numbers to be around 3.5 months of inventory. That's a really big shift quickly. It is surprising to me too. I mean, early this year in March, we were still waiting in line to show houses. So, there were 10 to 20 buyers for every single house, and that just kind of disappeared overnight. But biggest part of that, I think, is interest rates. I mean, rates have roughly gone from 3% to 6% in 6 months.
Yeah.
And just give you an example of how much that impacts affordability. The median home price as of June in the city of Austin is $615,000. If you were to purchase a house today for $615,000, that's the equivalent of buying a house in 2021 based on interest rates at $775,000. So it's $160,000 more house that you can get for the same price just based on your monthly affordability.
Right.
So it's obviously making a big impact. I think there is an element of people are just kind of waiting to see what's going to happen with the macro, and that's why a lot of people have pulled back. I do think that, like you said, within 12 months we'll probably see a pickup in demand happen again. I mean, those 10 to 20 buyers for every single house just haven't disappeared. They're just waiting on the sidelines, waiting to get a better feel for where we're at in the market, and then they'll take action when they feel more comfortable with it, when we kind of have a more sustained rate for more than a week or two.
Yeah. And another thing I will add, price appreciation is something that a lot of people look at in terms of their investment. When you're purchasing a house, a lot of times the investment is not the first thought. You're looking for a home and where to spend your time and host parties and whatever that may be. But it is a lot of money, so people do want to make sure that it is a sound investment. At least it's a good place to park that money. And Austin has still, even with this drop off and even with this dramatic shift, we are still seeing year-over-year appreciation, and that's something that we have to continue to remind people, because they see price reductions, they see these listings reducing their prices by large percentages or large dollar amounts. That is not an indication of price depreciation. Price appreciation, the way that is kind of accounted for, is year over year. So when we're looking at the median sales price of June, we're comparing it to last June, because that's the way in the housing market you have to look year over year, because month to month the data is too kind of scattered or too small of a data set to really compare, like, oh, prices dropped from one month to the next. We've never looked at real estate investment that way. It's always been year over year. So as of right now, in the month of the June numbers are out, we saw 7% increase in the median sales price in the city of Austin. 7% outperforms a large percentage of the country normally. The rest of the country has also gone through this kind of pandemic boom, but 7% is something a lot of markets would, that they would love to see in their market on a regular basis. We're coming off of 28.5, so it feels like a dramatic shift, but historically over the last 40-ish years, we've seen low sixes, high 5 year-over-year appreciation as an average. So that's much more in line with where we're at. I think the volatility of that number is going to bounce around the rest of the year, but where we ultimately end up, I think we can expect to be in those kind of high single digits year-over-year, and that's kind of that seems to be the expectation, kind of longer term as well.
For sure. I think that's an important point to make. When we turn on the news, it's very easy, you hear a lot that prices are falling and the sky is falling.
Slashing prices.
Yeah, prices are being slashed. The reality is, when we look at actual values, our median home price is up 7%, which again, like your national average for housing appreciation on an annual basis is somewhere between 3 to 5%. So we're still well above that. And I was looking at the MLS today trying to get an idea of where July's numbers will be, and it looks like our median home price in the city of Austin is going to be up roughly 10%. So up to $655K for median home price, and last year at this time we're at $575,000. So prices definitely are not dropping when we look at it from a year over year. It's just that we're in this. It's easy to be in a mindset now that prices are going down because we're seeing a lot of price reductions on listing prices, but that is not the same as values going down. That's just an indication that individuals have listed homes for too high of a price, and they're having to adjust their list price, their marketing price, for lack of a better way of describing it, to get to where the market actually is. In previous years, last year, I mean, the reality is we could pretty much slap any number on a listing and it would sell for some, whether or not it was above or below that number, it was going to sell just because there was a lack of inventory. Now it's going to be important for sellers when they're working with their agent to have a strategy on where they're positioning it to make sure that it's priced appropriately. And a lot of people haven't made that adjustment yet, and that's why we're seeing a lot of price reductions on the list price. But again, not an indication of actual value of the homes. We haven't seen decreases in a lot of home values.
Right, and another, to that same point, and this is something that we saw early 2020, post-COVID, we had that kind of screeching halt, March, April, May-ish is when it rebounded, and then kind of that middle part of the year when everything was being listed, we, as agents, we used comps to justify, to land on a list price, and you run comps in the neighborhood, in the area, similar homes, and you try to gauge where you need to be within the market. A lot of times you're kind of shooting at the top end because Austin, home prices increase. Well, a lot of times for listings, we're going back 6 months, 9 months, 12 months sometimes if you need to. And with that, a lot of agents were pricing homes based on what the comps were telling them to, and they would be off by 20% in the wrong direction. They were, they would price it at $600,000, they would sell for $720,000, and that's because the market was lagging behind. The real market was way ahead of what the historical comps were showing us, and that's, as agents, that's all we have to go off of is sold data. I mean, that's where we hang our hat. That's how we use to predict, and we can add premiums to that and take it away, looking at the different homes. But it's a bit of a moving target, and right now that's what we're seeing. Agents are listing homes based on historical comps this year, and that trend line is starting to flatten out a little bit, and they're still on this upward trajectory. So you're seeing these dramatic price decreases on the listing side where, well, they just missed the mark. They were projecting that trend line to continue to go up at 20%, and it's not. It's closer to 7%. So that's a big thing that we're seeing. And the other point that I wanted to mention is, because of the run that Austin has been on these last few years, a lot of homeowners have a ton of equity, and we're talking 30, 40, 50, 60% equity in the homes if they've owned it for a few years. And with that, when you price a home, it's way easier to come off of that original list price and come off in a bigger fashion when you've got 50% equity in a home. If you're listing a house for $800,000 that you bought for $400,000, it's easy to drop it $50,000 because you've got so much equity in it anyway that you're going to cash out and walk away with. And that's kind of what we're seeing is the norm in a more moderate normal market. You can't just cut your price 10% because sellers don't have that much equity to do it. So there's a little bit more price integrity and stability in that, because not all the sellers can do that right now. Most sellers can do that if they've owned it more than a few years in Austin.
For sure. With all that being said, do you feel comfortable buying homes in Austin now, and are you happy with the investments that you have now as far as holding them long term in Austin?
Yes, long term in Austin, I don't think there's any question of that. There are very, you can probably single out a few cases here in Austin over its history, but anyone who's bought a home in Austin over the last 30 years it was a pretty good return, and especially if you're holding it for more than 5 to 7 years. I am not a rental property owner. My investing is development, so it's much shorter term. It's a kind of a completely different analysis and play. We generally don't hold homes for more than 2 years. We actually prefer not to hold them that long. We're getting in, redeveloping them and selling them. So with that, we are having to make sure that we're buying right, that we can exit at where we want. We're keeping costs low on the build side, and and making sure that we're not going to get caught in between. And even right now, we bought some of our lots last summer, and we are coming up on to sell those, and that is bad timing. We basically timed it at a time where stuff was expensive, we paid a premium for it, and now we're going to have to be a little bit more lenient on the list side when we go to sell. With that being said, there's still we have capital preservation. We're not worried about losing money out of the particular deal. We're not going to, our margins are going to be slimmer than they were, but that is Austin as a whole. There's a lot of demand right now. It feels like a lot of that demand has dissipated. We expect that to come back, but we see demand at all levels, all price points. Right now, I think the biggest thing that's contributing to this retraction is fear, and I think that is short term. Fear doesn't last for very long, especially when people 6 months from now, if they're a little bit scared about losing their job, and 6 months from now they sell their job, they're probably not scared of losing their job anymore. It's this this limited time period where they're fearful of rates, fearful of the job, inflation, whatever. As soon as we get a little bit more answers, a little bit further from this scary time, I think that's when they jump back in. But Austin as a whole, in terms of me personally investing, I closed on a property 3 weeks ago. So yeah, we're still buying. Ideally, I would be selling at a slightly different time, because right now it's not the best time for that. But anyone who's owned their home for an extended period of time, you can sell. You're still going to make money. You're still probably going to sell it at a price you would have 6 months earlier. It's going to take a little bit longer. The terms are going to be a little bit more favorable to the buyer, or more so than they were. But Austin is something that we feel very confident in long term. What about you? You actively looking, or looking to sell, looking to buy? What's on your plate?
Yeah, definitely looking to buy more. I have actually 3 more under contract, 2 that'll be closing this year, and want to move on those for sure. The numbers on that are still really solid.
Single family rentals?
Yep. Single family rentals. As far as long term in Austin, I'm very bullish. I don't see any scenario in which we have any long term slowdown as far as prices going down. I think worst case in Austin is slowed growth. The reality is, I think that this market now is a positive. One of our biggest issues for the health of our overall market has been inventory. This is allowing inventory to catch up. This is allowing builders to catch up, and we have more resale homes on the market too. The other thing I think we will see, I think we'll probably see a little retraction of some of the resale homes that we have now, because of the point you mentioned earlier, where people have equity in their homes. There aren't really any have-to sellers out there right now. There's people that are like trying to take advantage of selling at the top, or want to cash in on their investment. There could be some people that are operating out of fear on that for sure. But the reality is people aren't losing money selling their house right now if they've had it for any extended amount of time. Most people that own their house in the city of Austin last year, the reality is they made a whole additional salary worth of income as far as their net worth goes. I mean, a lot of people made more than 6 figures on the equity growth in their house last year, which is crazy to think. That's not a year-over-year thing that's possible, but long term, the reality is Austin's a great place to live. There's a lot of companies that are investing here. There's a lot of great paying jobs here. So we got Tesla, Meta, Google, Oracle, Samsung. Samsung's talking about doing a $192 billion chip plant outside of Taylor, Texas, which is obviously a suburb of Austin. And to put that in perspective, I nerded out on this one a little bit. The Apollo program that we had here in the United States cost $25.8 billion. That's the equivalent in today's dollars of $257 billion. So Samsung's basically doing a similar cost to the Apollo program out in Taylor if they get that approved. I think that will definitely drive a lot of growth in that area. But beyond that, we've got Apple, Indeed, Canva, a whole bunch of big companies that are investing here in Austin. That's not going away. We're still the live music capital of the world. There's a lot of entertainment here. There's good weather, although we are taping this right now and it's like 100-some degrees outside, so good in quotation marks, but it is a warm weather climate for sure. We have the state government here. We have the University of Texas. All those things are going to be things that aren't leaving, that can continue to be reasons why Austin's a great place to live. And because of that, people are going to continue to move here, and there's going to continue to be demand for housing. So yes, I'm very bullish on purchasing homes in Austin, and I think that this little window that we have right now is really a window of opportunity, whether it's 3 months or 12 months where we're a little bit slower, whatever it may be. Now's a moment of opportunity for sure.
Right. And I think an important point to make is what we've experienced the last 24 months, or really, the majority of 2020 and 2021, even earlier this year, is that was an anomaly. We, appreciation at 25% plus, the home inventory below 1 month is that is the exception to the rule. We are getting back to more of a normal marketplace where buyers can look at multiple homes, they can negotiate on price, negotiate on terms. They don't have to put 25% down or 20% down or 40% down it was almost the norm last year. So it's becoming much more of a normal marketplace where you can act. It's much more comfortable for the buyer. The sellers have, the opportunity of sticking that sign in your yard, naming your astronomical price and probably getting it or getting pretty close to it. Those days are likely over. We're a high demand city, but it's much more balanced where we're going to see, a buyer and seller kind of, tug of war of kind of who has the upper hand. And I think right now, the months of inventory is a complicated thing. Something that they keep talking about is, the number of listings. Number of listings is one metric, and then buyer demand is measured based on the number of closings that we're seeing over a trailing 12-month period. And then months of inventory is those two numbers, or those two metrics, factored together. So if we have 100 homes on the market and we sell 100 a month, that's very different than if you have 100 homes on the market and you only sell 10 a month. And right now we've been, we had 1 month supply. Basically, if no new listings came on the market at the current level of buyer demand, we would be out of homes in a month. And we got as low as we got, I think it was 0.6 was the lowest that the city of Austin saw. So we're talking 2.5 weeks of no more listings and we would have been out of houses. The balanced market in Austin is around 3.5 to 4, and we haven't been there since 2016, I think it was. And that looks like where we're headed in the short term, whether we pull back from that number a little bit once things kind of settle down, or I guess get back to that. But I think being in that 2.5 to 3.5 month inventory number is probably where I think we will kind of settle and land in the short term. I think I'm the realistic one. He's the ultimate optimist. So I think we're going to probably see 4.5, if not a little bit above that. I do think it's going to come down. I think Zach's number isn't quite as high as that. I think he thinks it's going to come down probably a little quicker than I do, but both of us are in agreement that I don't think we're going to settle there long term. And long term, like in a year and a half from now, I think we're closer to 3 than we are to 5 for sure.
With that being said, in this market, do you think there's opportunities for buyers now?
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity for buyers right now is, one, ask yourself the question, how long do you want to own a home in Austin? If it's 2 years, then you should really need to reevaluate your circumstances of if it makes sense to buy. Most of the time, historically, if it was 2 years or 3 years, it's tight. That's where maybe it does make more sense to rent with your, down payment need and all of that. Austin's taking care of plenty of homeowners that have owned their home for 12 months, or in some cases even less. We've seen that where someone buys and sells inside of 6 months and they've made money.
Right, which historically is insane.
Right, yeah, not normal, and certainly shouldn't be your expectations. Our kind of general rule of thumb is, 3 years the minimum. Ideally, you'd like to get a little bit closer to, 4 to 5 years. And I think right now that opportunity is if you're going to be buying in the next 24 months, where you kind of pick your point to purchase. We don't really know what to expect 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now. But right now, what we do know is sellers are motivated, sellers are willing to negotiate, and they're showing signs of desperation because of that same fear that the buyers have. And I feel like that is short term. I think once we get past this kind of time frame, we will get to a point where sellers are going to be more stubborn on their price. They're going to be listed a little bit more accurately, and their circumstances are going to be a little bit different. Right now, we have this FOMO selling where sellers are just trying to cash out. Maybe it's an investment property that they don't need, and they want to take advantage of where they think kind of the top of the market is. But I think that's really opportunity for buyers. And the interest rate thing, you can overcome a bunch of different ways. So if you think you can't buy a house with a 4% interest rate, that's untrue. That we've had clients that have been locking at that, lenders that can accommodate that. So you're not going to get this 3.25. That's pretty much out, but you can get in the mid to low 4s, which is an interest rate that is still, we saw those interest rates in 2018. So not that, far off from the past. The main thing is if you've got a 5-year plan, you want to buy in Austin right now, you can kind of take your pick. Or we're seeing more inventory now than we've seen in the last few years. So that is something that we're seeing inventory levels that we haven't seen in 4 years. So for the first time in 4 years, you're actually able to go out, look at multiple homes, go back to your favorite one, have your mom and dad come with you the next time, whatever that may be, feel good about it, and then negotiate the price, negotiate the terms, make sure it makes sense for you before, moving forward, where we coming from this place where you're blindfolded, you don't even get to see the house, you don't get to pick any of the terms, you pay what the seller wants, and they don't fix anything. And that's an uncomfortable situation as a buyer and as a buyer's agent. That's been very difficult to, hold that person's hand through the process when it feels like they're getting beaten up the whole time. Now, it's a little bit more, it's a lot more comfortable for a buyer. I think the discomfort is like, where's the market going? What's going to happen to the prices? If we see a price decrease over the next 12 months, hypothetically, if we saw 5%, if you own this place 5 years, that 5% isn't going to matter much. You may lose out on 1 year of those years of appreciation, but the expectation is in 5 years from now, Austin is going to be much more expensive than it is right now.
For sure. From my standpoint, I think when we look at the demand that was there a few months ago, I mean, we talked about the last 2 years. The reality was if you didn't have at least 20% to put down on a house, you had basically no shot at competing in this market, because you weren't going to win a multiple offer situation without being able to cover a large appraisal gap. But now, because we do have less demand, you can actually get into a house for less than 20%, 10%, 5%, whatever it may be. So you don't have to have as much cash to be able to enter this market, which opens up a lot of different financing options. And like you said, you're going to have your pick of the different homes, not only just resale, but there's also a lot more new build inventory that's out there. And with new build, there's a lot of incentives on the lender side, paying down closing costs, as well as getting you additional rates as part of their incentives to get you to purchase a home with them. So new build, I think there's some solid options out there as well when we look at spec builders. Beyond that, with on the buy side, I mean, you remember this whole last couple of years, getting a home warranty built into a contract was impossible. Any sort of seller concessions, which are seller paid closing costs, basically impossible to make happen. Now we can negotiate for those type of terms into a contract. We can use those seller paid closing costs to help you buy down the rate. So there's a lot more options now that give you leverage on the buy side than there has been in many months, a couple of years here in Austin. And we don't know how long that's going to last. Again, the one thing that I keep thinking about is it was just a few months ago when every single house we showed, we were in line to show that house. There were legitimately 10 to 15 physical buyers present at all of those houses. And I just don't see a scenario in which all of those buyers have completely disappeared. I think once things stabilize, that people are going to start coming back in the market, and it could happen quickly. We know the circumstances now, there's opportunity to buy without a ton of competition. That might be the case for an extended amount of time, but it might not be either. So now could be a window where you can get in without that competition, where it could come back sooner than later, where it's back to crazy bidding wars and not having your choice of homes because you're competing with cash buyers and all that good stuff. So
yeah, another thing with that inventory number is, Zach's expectation or his comment about buyers coming back to, where did they go? It seems like they're standing on the sideline, they're waiting to kind of run back out on the field. But there's a lot of opportunistic sellers that are just cashing out, wanting to get rid of the homes that they've had for years, investment. The one that I think of is investors that have rental properties. They've rented them for 2 to 10 years, and it feels like a good time to get out. They can cash out on this investment, and they're looking for that opportunity. And if they're not happy with the prices they're getting, and that the fact that the market's shifting, and they pull those houses off the market, they decide, let's just rent it again for another year or two. I think there's going to be a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of rental properties on the market, which is investors selling. Well, they have a choice of not selling and just continuing to rent it, because a lot of times their carrying costs are well below what they're making in rent, because they've owned it for a number of years. So if they don't get their number, they'll pull it, they'll rent it out, and that's going to deplete that inventory number, which is something that we don't normally see. We don't have this, frankly, because homes don't normally sit on or haven't been sitting on the market. So they haven't had that they haven't had to make that choice. So that is something that I think happened personally. I have 2 clients that were selling have chosen not to, and they've continued to rent their homes for, in both of them, let's rent at least for 8 to 10 months, let's get to the spring and we'll reevaluate. And I think there's going to be a lot of that, and that is going to bring that inventory number down. So those homes are going to disappear, not only based on buyers buying, but sellers opting not to sell right now.
For sure. Yeah, like I said, this opportunity could be extended longer than I think. Like I think it's within 3 months where we'll start to see it pick up again, but it could be shorter than that. As quickly as this turned around, it could go the other direction. We don't know that for sure, but we know current circumstances right now, there's opportunity. And if you've been on the fence for a while, highly recommend that you take advantage of the circumstances now, because you might not be able to later.
Yeah, I mean, a big thing is, understanding what you're looking for, in the time of ownership. Are you going to be, do you confidently think you're going to be there 3 to 5 years? What kind of rate you can get. Talk to multiple lenders, talk to an agent, get their preferred lender, pick their brain, see where you can land. Because if you think it's 5.25 and it's 4.5, that's a big difference in your monthly payment. And that's going to dictate a few things. One, your comfort level, but also your price point. That's going to dictate, I can afford a little bit more expensive of a home with this lower rate, which is obviously what we're dealing with now. Or it just allows you to reduce that payment. Like, this is cheaper than what I was expecting to pay, and it may make sense for you. And I think the big thing is ask questions. Don't be quiet. Don't be shy. Ask those questions. Get opinions from the experts, lenders, real estate agents, even existing homeowners. Whoever you go to, don't just sit in silence and watch the news, because if you do that, there's opportunities that are going to be missed in this marketplace. I mean, and a lot of our clients that have moved up in the marketplace would have never ended up in the homes they're in now had they not bought years ago. And that's something that I see most common with my clients that are buying in, $1 million plus properties. They're doing that with all the equity that they've built in these lower price point homes.
Yeah. And the U.S. homeowners have a net worth 45 times greater than that of renters. Yeah. And the primary reason for that is your largest allocation of funds for most people on a monthly basis goes towards housing. And as a homeowner, you're going to retain that through equity, whereas when you're a tenant, you're paying your landlord's mortgage.
Yeah.
So definitely get yourself in a position to take advantage of Austin's growing market, and do it at a time where you're not having to compete with everybody, all 10 to 15 people in line. It's not a fun process.
This is the opportunity that buyers have been clamoring for the last 2 years. So the opportunity is now. If you want to go look at a few homes, you be able to negotiate on the price, feel like you can beat up the seller a little bit, that has been non-existent the last 2 years, and that is, it's real right now. Sellers would really have to think about saying no to a buyer and not even countering, where in the past that was common. They would say, this is my price, take it or leave it, and they could call the shots. Buyers, that that power has kind of shifted from the seller to the buyer.
All right, do you have anything else you want to add on the market overall, or should we jump into questions from the
We got a question. Yeah, we can jump into questions. We got a question from Kenny. His question is, are there any 20% down cash flow positive opportunities in Austin?
Well, very few. They're definitely within the city limits of Austin, it's basically non-existent right now. That might change a little bit, but if we expand and we look out in the surrounding areas like Kyle and Buda, Pflugerville, there are some opportunities. Basically, it's everything to make it work from a cash flow standpoint. When we talk cash flow, what we're meaning by that is that your monthly costs, so that's your principal, interest, taxes, insurance, if you have a mortgage on it, as well as your capital expenditures and vacancy, if you should be figuring that in as well. That is covered by the amount you're bringing in through rent, so that you're obviously making money on a monthly basis rather than losing money on a monthly basis. And there are a few that are basically break-even cash flow opportunities, but that's under 400,000. Basically, Pflugerville, Kyle, Buda are the areas that a few of those homes exist. There are some that pop up from time to time that you can do a traditional long-term lease on that have those cash flow numbers. But if you're talking about, which I assume Kenny's asking in this question, if you're just talking like a traditional long-term rental, in the city limits of Austin, it's very difficult to do it just 20% down on an investment loan. That being said, there is some flexibility if you're open to doing short-term rentals or 30-day rentals. You're going to bring in more on a monthly basis if you rent it out properly. Now, the obstacles with that is if you do it correctly in the city of Austin, you're supposed to have that permitted. City of Austin is also saying for type 2 permits that they're going to be stopping those, which those are the permits where you do not live in the home at all. It's just a rental. The reality is, though, in Austin, 75% of the short-term rentals are not permitted. And there's roughly 10,000 short-term rentals in Austin. And when we say short-term rental, we're talking about like Airbnb, VRBO, Verbo, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
Can't be saying VRBO, be here in Austin. My bad, team. Verbo.
It was a rebrand. It was not that long ago, so you're all right.
But you can bring in a lot more cash on that to where you can have a higher price home in the city of Austin and cash flow with a 20% down. But there is a lot more risk inherent with that, especially if you're doing it without the permit, because you can start getting those fines. You can get shut down by the city of Austin if they discover that you're doing it off the books. So something to look at, and if you're interested in making that happen, we can definitely look at the options both for long-term and short-term rental and look at all of the variables that are involved with that. Anything to add on that?
Yeah, the short-term rental permit, the biggest thing, and I get this question a lot from the clients, my response is do your research, read the rules and the regulations that are in place from the city of Austin. There are a lot of people not following those rules, but that doesn't mean that just because they aren't, you shouldn't, because there's expensive fines, you can get shut down, and you can get a type 2 permit. You got to jump through different hoops, and there's a lot of limitations to it. But there are other ways to do it, and one of them is if it is a 30-day, if you're doing monthly rentals, which is, traveling nurses to, executives that are coming in town for work for a short amount of time, 30-day rentals is not considered short-term. So that is, you don't need a permit to do that. That's looked at like a regular long-term rental, but does normally generate a higher revenue in rents when you're doing it that way.
For sure. And when it comes to this, anytime that we're looking at doing purchasing an investment property for or with our clients, we're going to look at all those variables for every single property. You can't just say you can't just say overall this is available or not available. It really comes down to each individual property. So we'll evaluate all the numbers for that, looking both at appreciation rates. We'll look at current lease rates. We'll look at what your mortgage is going to be. We'll look at the opportunities to put some money into it and what your after repair value would be, and all the opportunities to increase the rate or the return on investment there.
Cool.
All right, my friends. Well, that pretty much wraps up our first podcast here. If you have any questions that you want us to answer on the podcast, go ahead and send me an email at zac@wiseaustin.com. Really appreciate y'all listening and look forward to many more episodes to come. Got anything to add?
No, sir. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, my friends. Have a great day. Thanks so much.